Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day three of this year's virtual conference. I hope everyone had a great day yesterday. I was particularly impressed with Scott Brown. He did some really great things where he is in wealth of knowledge. We will definitely make sure that he is on our list of people who come and speak when we are back in Las Vegas, hopefully in February of 2022. Kind of a recap, let you know what's going on in Ohio for those of you that don't always see what's going on. We are now under a curfew from 10 at night till 5 in the morning. The city of Columbus and Franklin County, where Columbus is located, they are on a 28-day stay-at-home advisory. It's not mandatory, but they're asking people to stay at home and only leave when absolutely necessary. More schools are closing, not because of COVID that is happening in the schools, but because they don't have enough teachers and bus drivers. So it's getting worse here. My prediction is that in Ohio, we will close schools next week for Thanksgiving break and probably won't reopen until the first of the year in hopes of everyone getting better. I really hope that doesn't happen, but I'm afraid it's going to. Before we start today, I want to remind you that there was a time in my career where I was just like you. I was in charge of the safety and security for our district and was able to attend a lot of conferences. And one of the things that always kind of struck me is there were people who would come and present, and they would have you believe that if you do everything that they tell you to do in your school district, then your schools and your students would always be 100% safe. And I don't know how they could ever say that without knowing your population, your demographics, how many buildings you have, et cetera. And so what I was able to learn quickly was that because I wasn't a consultant, because I wasn't trying to sell something, I was just the guy that was in charge. I could pick and choose what I learned from some of the presenters and said, well, this will work in our district, but this won't. And so I was able to tailor a program that met our needs. And that's why I'm kind of disappointed that I'm the third speaker, or this is the third time I'm speaking, not because I'm not some incredibly brilliant guy. No, not because of that, but because you're limited to hearing other people. And I think that's important that, whether it's this conference, another conference, an article you read, training that your local law enforcement agency puts on, always remember that you need to tailor whatever solution is there to your district, your school, your university. There is no one size fits all. And so I think that's just important. I wrote a white paper years ago with Dr. Scott Polland, and we talked about the 5 layers of school safety, because there's not just one thing you can do. It's a bunch of things you have to do. If any of us had that one thing to do, we'd be gazillionaires right now on a beach somewhere, and we're not. So we'll get started a little bit early. Today is another, for lack of a better word, train the trainer course. What I'm, my goal is, based on the promising results we're seeing from these vaccines, is that by September of 2021, we should be back in school again. And we'll probably still be wearing masks. We'll still be washing our hands. I don't know that physical distancing will be as important, but and what that means to you and your profession is you're going to have to pivot once again. I'm not sure how much training you've done this year with your staff. If you're in a blended learning format, we are doing a lot of virtual learning where I will do a taped presentation, and then that same taped presentation is shown to every building, to every cohort. And so we've had to get kind of creative. Our real focus, let's be honest, has not been on all hazards. It's been on a pandemic and how to keep the kids safe. But we're going to be back in the classroom, and our teachers want training. And here's the importance of training. We don't do a very good job of letting our staff know all the things we do to keep them and our students safe. And I'll give you an example. It's nice in my profession. I do get to travel around the United States, and I was actually going to do a training in a school district near where my roommate from college lived. And so I told him, I said, hey, I'm going to be up in your area. I'm going to be doing a training. And he says, oh, that's great. Our neighbors actually teach in that district, and they complain all the time about how unprepared their school is for an emergency. So I went up, I did a 3-hour presentation. We talked about all the things that were going on. And I called my roommate the next night. I said, Chris, what did your neighbors think? And he said, they are so impressed by what their district is doing to keep them safe. Now, nothing changed in that 3 hours. What we did is we trained them to know what was going on. And just that training made them feel more confident in this thing that I keep using over and over again. We empowered them to make decisions in case there was an emergency. So let's get started with today. Today we're going to talk about some things. Left of Bang, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. We'll talk about active threats. We're going to review Parkland and the lessons learned from Sandy Hook. And we're going to look at a way of responding to active threats. We're not looking at the way, we're looking at a way. Now, yesterday we talked about what we knew about school shootings. And I want you to make sure that when you're talking to your staff that they know, we believe bad things could happen here, but we are putting things in place to prevent bad things from happening, because that's what's really important. Those of you, and I'm hoping all of you at one time or another have taken at least IS 100, the Incident Command System. It's the introductory level. And if you haven't done so already, EMI, the Emergency Management Institute, you can take these classes online. You can take 100, 200, 700, 800 online. They each take about 3 hours. If you're a superintendent, if you're the safety director, then the U.S. Department of Education and Homeland Security want you to take IS 300 and 400, and those are face-to-face that you'll have to take through usually your state or county EMA office. I think what's important to understand is that not all school shootings are active shooter events, and I'm just gonna, I don't just work in the K-12 and higher ed field. I also work in business and healthcare, and when we look at what's happening across the United States, we are seeing events that occur in a school, and we call it a school shooting, where if that exact same event would have happened at a nursing home or at a Walmart, we never would have batted an eye. If you guys remember the San Bernardino shooting, not the terrorist attack at the office complex, but at the school, where the man showed up at school, they buzzed him in. He said, I have something for my wife. They were in the process of getting a divorce. And the secretary said, well, you know where your wife's classroom, go on down there. And the assailant killed his wife, probably by accident, a 7-year-old child, and then committed suicide. And people wanted to call that a school shooting because it happened at school. Okay, yes, it happened at school. It was a school shooting. Was it an active shooter event? And we'll get into the definition of active shooter event here in just a little bit. But really, that was domestic violence. And, those of you who have looked at what OSHA talks about domestic violence, this is quite common. This is type 4 spousal. So be aware of that. When we look at lessons learned from that event, we talk about what should have happened. Well, first of all, if you're in a domestic violence situation and you believe that violence may come to your school, you need to let your supervisor know about that. And I'm going to be honest with you, that would be an embarrassing thing to have to say. I don't know that I'd want to do that, but it's your responsibility to protect your coworkers and the students. So once your supervisor, your building administrator knows, and we've done this for schools across the United States, the first thing we do is we make sure that everyone knows who the bad guy is. Who is his husband? We've had the woman, because it's always in all my cases of doing this, and I've had about 5 across the United States. It's always been the ex-husband or soon-to-be ex-husband. We get a picture, And we share that picture with every employee because the teachers whose classrooms face parking lots or, they have an outside view, we tell them when you're teaching, look around. If you see this person, call 911 and then notify the office immediately. So the building administrator then, in this case, could have called the local law enforcement and said, look, we know that you can't be here every day watching for this guy, but could you give us more patrols through the parking lot? If your officer needs to finish a crash report, can they finish the crash report in our lot? If your officer needs to use the bathroom facility or wants to use a cup of coffee, have them come inside and we'll do that. And so what happens is if the bad guy then comes around, well, they're going to see the officer and they're going to realize this isn't a soft target. And then, of course, he never should have been let in the building, and he was let in the building. So again, if one of the great things that Scott talked about yesterday was the all hazards approach, and we can't just focus on one thing. There's multiple things. So I'm not sure how many of you've heard of the expression left to bang, but when you talk about time moves from left to right. And so, I was born in 1960 on the left. It's 2020 on the right. Bang is when something bad happens. And so we always want to be to the left side of bang. How do we prevent bang? Now, in your handouts, you should have this document. Now, if you don't have this document, that's A-okay. But you have access to it. We put all the documents. You're going to get at the end of the conference, you're going to get one more email from us thanking you for being here. And you'll get one link that has all 4 days in all the handouts. Like, for example, yesterday we added information on FERPA, and we added information on school resource officers, including, I might add, an MOU between the school and the law enforcement agency that services that school that deals with body cameras, because if your school has a body camera, or if your department has a body camera policy, your school rules can't violate that policy. So you'll get all this stuff. So I'd like you to go to the questions. If you downloaded this document, that's great. You don't have to. You can download it later. But what I want you to look at is this is you. We're doing a train the trainer. And you are training your staff in a staff meeting in August of next year. And you want them to understand all the things that you're doing within the district that meets the 4 phases of emergency management and what your school is doing. So those of you that want to participate, go to the question side. And when you think about environment, okay, which, so left to bang is your prevention, planning and prevention, mitigation, and then you have bang, something bad happens. So then how do you respond to that? And then how do you recover? So what are the things under the left of bang, prevention, mitigation, planning? I divided them into 3 categories: environment, training, mental health. What are some things that you're doing that you could guide your staff to start listing? Now, I'll give you the first one. Under environment, the first thing I would put is one of the things that Ron talked about on the first day: positive school climate. Are you working to do a positive school climate? So your staff members would, they're working in small groups, they would write in positive school climate under environment. What are some other things? Use the question and answer box. And to just shout out, what else in your district are you doing that is environmental? And I'll wait. This is often going to be hardware and software. Anybody? Bueller? What about school ID cards? How many people have their students use school ID cards for their middle school and high school students? Is anyone? There we go. Staff wears IDs. Very good. Why is it important in a high school or in a middle school that students also wear IDs? Well, I'm going to be honest with you. When I was in the district, I would go from building to building. I didn't know all the staff members, so it was great that I knew that somebody was a staff member by seeing their ID. but because I wore a district ID, they also knew that I belonged. And so it's important that staff wear IDs um, for the staff wear IDs so that everybody knows who belongs. High schools have IDs for checking in and out, but not required to wear. I'll tell you, there is a fine line between having students wear IDs and then also making it a disciplinary function. Students shouldn't be disciplined because they forgot their IDs, but we had teachers that wouldn't wear their IDs until we started having smart cards where staff members needed their IDs to get into certain parts of the building. So now there was a reason to use it. So the schools that have the most compliance with students wearing IDs is when the students needed to check in and check out of the building that's shown there, to get their lunch, to check a book out, to do things like that. Then it becomes more, the students see the value in it. It should never be a discipline. You should be able to make students an ID. But if I'm a substitute teacher, I want to know who belongs in the building and who doesn't. So other things that you could have in, a lot of us use the single points of entrance. Once the school day starts, everyone's funneled into one door, and usually there's a visitor management system. So I would put visitor management system in there. SRO, SSOs, trained security personnel. How many of you, is it kind of the policy that nobody enforces that teachers should be in the hallway during class changes? Anyone? Does anyone have an administrator who says, teachers, I'd like you to be in the hallway during class changes? Yes. Okay. That is phenomenal. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. And the reason for that is, number one, we know this is management by walking around. And the more the kids see you, the less chance that they can do something wrong. And what I really like is when teachers are out in the hallway and they're talking to students as they walk by. They are looking at them. Hey, how you doing? Don't forget we have a test today. Someone just put in, Jacob, perfect. Helps build relationships. Go back to what Dr. Murphy said. Students are less likely to make a mistake if they have a caring, trusting adults in their lifetime. Let's see. Staff and kids should be charged $1 for not having an ID, and that would alleviate the problem of not wearing a badge. Yeah, I see that. I just don't. I want to make it. I want to make it a positive reason to wear IDs, not a reason for being punished. So that students and staff see the value of this. So that's kind of a thought. Other things we might want to have in place. Bullying prevention. In the state of Ohio, it is required that all school districts have an anonymous tip line, but the state also provides anonymous tip lines. Do any of your states have that? If you could, say yes or no, and what state you're from, that you have to have a tip line, that would be kind of important to see. Tennessee, great. Someone just chimed in about IDs, what they're using. Wyoming, safe to tell. Outstanding. Washington, that is great. Did anybody share the video that Scott showed yesterday on the See Something, Say Something? I did. I shared that with my friends because I thought that was so cool. And it was clever about the pizza turning into or the ice cream shop turning into pizza. But what was more, I thought important was the guy leaving the bag. Colorado has safe to tell. That's great. Do you guys have bullying prevention? What about security and vulnerability assessments? How many of you guys are doing security and vulnerability assessment? Right now, the Ohio Attorney General's office is making funding available for local law enforcement to do a security and vulnerability assessment where we're looking for policies, procedures, things like fencing, bollards around utilities, camera systems, where are the cameras? Those are a great way to help identify schools, school districts, and colleges of the things that they're doing well as some weaknesses. Peer mediation, camera systems, say something, do something. See something, say something, do something is another thing. So those are things that go under environment. Now, I'm going to ask you, and again, continue to share in the question and answer. What are some of the trainings that you are doing in your district or in your school or at your college to prepare people for emergencies? I'll take the easy one. Who did a, let's see, someone, uh, Ms. I don't know, Laval, I'm hoping I pronounced that right, completed a site survey and we added additional cameras and blind spots. See, that's why we do a security and vulnerability assessment. We don't know what we don't know until we take that survey. Now, Jacob here says they alternate every month between a fire and a crisis drill. Very good. Drills are a perfect thing. And it's got to be leveling. Remember, we're going to start with training, discussion base, tabletop, functional, full scale. And every time we ask those questions afterwards, what did we do well? How would we handle it differently? Do we need to change our plans? Do we need to change our training? So those are great things. I'm going to presume everyone, we already said this, works with your first responders. Okay, that's a given. You have to work with your first responders. Everybody has an emergency operations plan, I'm going to hope. And if you don't have an emergency operation plan, or you don't have an emergency operation plan that is all hazard, and you're looking for something that is free, and I always use those words over and over again, free. If you go to the REMS TA Center and just type that in, REMS space TA space center, that's run by the U.S. Department of Education. Not only do they have a free EOP assist, but they also have for free a site assess tool. So any of those kind of things that you can do. Tomorrow, we are going to hear from Lori, and she's going to talk about bleed control, which is so important. How do we stop the bleed? Putting kits in places. The incident command system. I'll tell you what I really like what Scott talked about yesterday is Scott talked about situational awareness, looking around what looks out of place. I've seen other presentations where they're talking about situational awareness, and they show a photo of the Boston bomber right before the bomb went off. And what's interesting is everybody is looking in one direction except him. He was looking in a different direction. That stood out. Nobody caught it. I don't think anybody could have fixed anything if they had caught it. Maybe they could have identified him earlier as a suspect. But so situational awareness, behavioral analysis. What behaviors are people engaging in that cause you concern? And Scott talked about that yesterday. The stereotype of it's cold or it's warm weather, everyone's wearing shorts and t-shirts, and you see somebody wearing long sleeves or a heavy jacket because they're trying to conceal something. And I'm trying to remember some training I had, but there was a bomber in a European airport, and you saw the bomber, and he was wearing like a puffy down jacket, yet the pilots who were walking beside him was in a short sleeve shirt. So his jacket didn't fit what he was wearing or what for the circumstances. We do drills all the time. The disaster team that the principal makes the team go over the drill and talk about it. Not long, it could, who did what, where did the kids go, etc. Yeah, see, that's great. I mean, the more drills, Scott talked about this yesterday, the muscle memory of being able to just respond. We were training a new officer yesterday, or not yesterday, last week in firearms, and our agency has a different holster than what his previous agency has. And in his training, I told him, I need you to go home. I need you to make sure your gun is unloaded. I need you to make sure your gun is unloaded. And then I need you to make sure your gun is unloaded. But then what I want you to do is practice with this holster at least 100 times until you develop muscle memory so that you don't have to think about it. I always remember back in my first days of law enforcement, I actually had a death strap holster, kind of like what Barney Fife had. I upgraded to a thumb brake, and there were guys that had level 2 and 3 holsters. In my entire career, I had a level 1 because that's what my muscle memory was. So Okay, we've gone under training. So now let's switch over to mental health, because this is where so many schools, especially after Parkland, realized that they were falling down on. So, what are some of the things that your school is doing in terms of mental health under the prevention mitigation planning that keeps us left of bank? Hired a trauma-informed counselor. Oh, that is phenomenal, because it's amazing how many of our students are coming to school with PTSD. That is phenomenal, Jacob. What else do we have? Everyone has regular counselors as well. How about social workers? Is anyone bringing social workers in? And the nice thing about social workers is a lot of times those come for free because you're working with the community grant. Um, some school districts are going to restorative justice programs. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it not only holds people accountable for what they do, but it also involves them in the process of how do we make it right? I did something wrong. How do I make this right? I am hoping that every one of you guys have threat assessment teams, and that every one of you has behavioral intervention teams. Threat assessment teams, and there are some great companies out there that give threat assessment training. I think it's important that you understand that we're not trying to get a kid in trouble when we do a threat assessment. We're trying to take them on that pathway to violence. And someone said, Deputy Eli said, we have psychiatrists from the local university stop by several days per week. That is phenomenal. I think Dr. Murphy touched on this a little bit. We are solely lacking in mental health people, not just in practice, but we don't have them in the colleges today. And we really need those people to help our students. So everything that we just talked about, environment, training, mental health, that all was left of bang. That was all of the things that we do that are prevention, planning, mitigation. Okay, we don't want something bad to happen. And folks, um, I don't know that there's anything that we can do to make our schools 100% safe. I often use, we want to turn our schools into castles, not prisons. And when you think about it, castles and prisons are very similar in terms of security measures. But everybody wants to go to the castle. Nobody wants to go to prison. So we can't put our schools into such a condition that teachers don't want to work there, that support staff don't want to be there, that students don't want to learn there. So there's no 100%. So now let's talk about something bad has happened. What is our response? What do you have in your school right now for response? So I'm going to talk about the three outs today, but there's run, hide, fight. There's Alice. What are your schools doing in terms of training for response? I don't see anything with a moat around the school. That's pretty true. Okay. So what are some of the trainings that you're using? I did see the other day someone was using Alice. Yep, someone uses Alice. Very good. I'm an Alice instructor. Is anybody using either for their schools or their business? Avoid, deny, defend. Let's see, we've done district-wide Alice training with staff and students. Very good. Heavy emphasis on active intruder, not just firearm threats. Very good. More secure, defend. Very good. Move, secure, defend. Yep. Run, hide, fight, but we have not had full exercise because of concerns from parents. Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you right now. That's um, um, we have got to move away from scary drills. I was hired by a school district, and the reason I was hired is because there were the district was served by two jurisdictions. and they both were training differently. One set of buildings had one kind of training, the other set of buildings had the other kind of training, and it's a lawsuit. That's just a lawsuit waiting to happen. But then I've been called in because law enforcement has wanted to do unannounced lockdown drills using flashbangs. I had a sheriff contact me one time because a superintendent wanted the sheriff to send in a plainclothes officer and have them fire blanks in the hallway to see how students and staff respond. And I had one case where the SRO wanted to bring in a Nerf gun and shoot at students and staff to show them why they had to do something he said to do. So I see that Officer Chester says that they use avoid, deny, defend, and Alice mix of both for schools. And see, Officer Chester, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier, where you don't have to pick one thing. You can kind of blend it to meet your needs. I do know that with Alice, there's often a lot of pushback from parents and superintendents. I know the majority of superintendents in the area that I am, where I live, are opposed 100% to Alice, and so we had to come up with other plans for them. How many of you guys have classroom safety kits? I have a district that has a bucket. They put a 5-gallon bucket in every classroom, and in that bucket there is a hammer in case they had to break a window, gloves and eye protection. There are straps to secure the door, and there are first aid kits so that they can do bleed, and they've been trained in how to use all of those. So I think those are good. Bleeding control kits in every single classroom within the district. Yeah, you know what I'm going to ask is, for the bleeding control kits, Officer Chester, are you guys using any chemical blood clotting, or did you stay away from that due to you're really not going to use it? Hemostatic, that's what I was thinking about. Any in a hemostatic gauze, or are you just using 4x4s and those kind of things? Bleed controls located in the hallways with the AED and EpiPens. Very good. There are companies out there, by the way, that have but I'm not gonna. I won't. If you email me, because you're gonna have my email information, I will send you this company's information. A lot of my clients use it because we were able to put gauze, gloves, wound packing material, and tourniquets in every single classroom. And then we have bigger kits for like mass events like basketball games, football games. Someone said they have the contents, and there's Deputy Eli says their contents are pretty minor, and that's okay because I'll go back to what I said yesterday. Schools are safe, and because schools are safe, we don't need to have all that stuff, but we need to have people trained, and we need to have the material ready. The one thing that I will say to you, if you have a district that is diverse, you can't let one PTA buy stuff for buckets that another building won't have. You need to have a policy that says everybody has, everyone has to have the same stuff. Stayed away from those. Yeah, three tourniquets, gauze, gloves, Israeli bandages, and EMT shears. Thank you, Officer Chester, for that information. Yeah, we don't recommend. I mean, I carry in my own kit. I carry hemostatic gauze, and I probably have some that is expired, but it's for me, so I don't care. But I wouldn't use that on somebody else. So that's great. And Lori will talk on this stuff tomorrow. And the thing that will be disappointing is I don't know if you'll be able to see her, but the first time I saw her present, she was wearing a T-shirt, and it said, "This T-shirt could save your life." And what she was talking about is you can use it from anything from tourniquets to wound packing, etc. So, all right, here's. Do you guys have rally points? So, where do you tell your students to go? If for whatever reason they felt the building was unsafe, where do they go so that you can round them up later? Knowing that no plan is perfect, but if all of a sudden kids just started fleeing the building, where they would go? Football field. Okay, good. Is somebody at the football field is the question. Do first responders know for them to go to the football field? I work with some rural communities, and there's no place for the kids to go. Rally point first, then somewhere safe. Very good. What we try to do is we try to get a rally point, and then from the rally point, we move them somewhere else. But our first responders know where the rally points are. So if something bad happens, a supervisor will say, I need this unit here to go to this rally point. And what's interesting, here's a nice way of training your students where the rally point is without being scary. And so what we do is we will do a 2-part drill, and we'll say, okay, we're going to do a fire drill because we're going to simulate a gas leak, and say, so they go to their their area where they go for a fire drill, and then they said, okay, now let's pretend that for whatever reason the fire department told us we can't stay here. Where would we go? And then you would literally walk the entire group of students, the student body, the staff, to that area and say, if we're not safe at the school, here's the next place that's safe. And so you don't say this is where you go if there's a person with a gun. This is, you don't make drills frightening. And I see that Anthony, they use Navigate Prepare, which is a great product, expensive, but it's a great product. What about, we teach staff to take kids with them to a location that seems to be safe for them and appropriate. Some may go to the softball, baseball fields. So in other words, you're empowering Deputy Eli. You are empowering your staff to make decisions. That is exactly what you need to do. I will tell you that, for those of you that were doing this before Columbine, I can tell you that we would teach teachers in an active shooter event to get under the table and hold the legs. Now, why did we teach them that? Because that's what kept us safe during earthquakes. We would certainly never do that today, but we just didn't know better. So our training has evolved in situations, and Deputy Eli also said take them to subdivisions, local PD gas, and then also said give them ideas of things to consider, facilities to help with during inclement weather. Absolutely. I mean, you've got to, just like when we were in the academy, what if we go here, but now it's raining? How long will it take to get buses here? Can we get buses here? Is there a business we can go to? Is there a church nearby that we can have keys to the facilities? All of those things have to be in place. What about, how many of you have a well thought out, well written reunification plan? You haven't tested it yet, but you at least have a plan. I got one. Anthony's got it. Who else? We have a plan and have tested. Outstanding, Jacob. That's exactly, because if you just have a plan, all you have is a theory. And let me ask you this, Jason or Jacob. The first time you tested your plan, did it go as everything expected, or did you have to make some changes? Chaotic. Very good. Yeah, and that's what it's supposed to be. What do you think it's going to be like in the real deal? Okay. We do in areas, but not a statewide template. I'm going to remind you guys again to Google I Love You Guys. And the I Love You Guys Foundation has a great starting plan. Let's see, we have a great mass notification system in the district school system. It's called the SARA system. Teachers wear a lanyard around their neck and can push it to alert dispatch, SROs, and teachers. That is phenomenal. That is phenomenal. I try to always make sure that everything we do is as low cost as possible, because I always joke when I got promoted from the classroom to the district service center, I joke that I went to every part of the building and I tried to find that room that was filled with money that the treasurer and the superintendent just rolled around in it. And there is no money for schools, so we have to try to get the most for bang for our buck. And yeah, it's hard. Okay, so Information to the stakeholders, and that, of course, is your mass notification system. Now, the event's over. Kids are with their parents. Everyone's safe or not safe. So what does recovery look like? And what does recovery mean? See if anybody wants to throw out what they think recovery means in these 4 phases of emergency management. So recovery is the business. It's a long-term process. Very good, Jacob. It's the process of getting back to school. And, I remembered how this was a challenging thought process for me, and it's challenging when I talk to other school districts. It is when a significant event happens in our school, we want to try to get the students and staff back together as soon as possible to get them into a sense of normalcy. So I've got talking with the kids, counselors, hot washing the entire situation to see what could have been done, counseling for everyone in the teachers and the students, kids talking with counselors, trying to get things back to normal, mental preparation for the staff, students, and the community. They're prepared for the when happens, address mental health concerns with students and staff before everything goes back to normal. These are all phenomenal suggestions. This is exactly what you want. And I know, like from a law enforcement point of view, I was on the shooting team, so I dealt with the critical incident stress management piece of it. An officer, a firefighter, or a nurse has been in a line of duty death, and my job was to help them through that part of the trauma. Yes, sometimes I did an investigation piece, but my primary duty when I was called out to an officer-involved shooting was to work with the officer because of this trauma that they just faced. I said, look, you're going to have trouble sleeping, you're going to have some nightmares, etc. These are normal reactions to an abnormal situation. In schools, we have things like TSIP and Prepare, which are groups that, and I can share those with you. These are for when these are programs that are developed that consistently take students and staff through the recovery process. And like I said, there's a lot out there. So, it's one of those Googles, but talk to your school psychologist, because chances are your school psychologist, they already have something. We've got to talk about, how do we start school? I had a coworker. In fact, she was actually going to speak at the conference. She works down in Louisiana, and they had some events happen flooding wise. And so she's there with her staff trying to get their building clean. And the custodian says, hey, there are 3 trucks out here. And she said, what? Yeah, there are 3 semi trucks here. And what had happened is someone heard about her small private school, and they took up a collection. And there was enough in this collection for 3 semis. And they brought the 3 semis and said, here you go. And she didn't know what to do with it. I mean, she wasn't even prepared for it, didn't even know it was coming. So how do we handle donations? What do we do about memorials? If you remember back in Columbine, there were some people that actually believed the 2 shooters should be in the memorials because, after all, they had something wrong with them that led this to happen. And so memorials are a tough thing because is it going to be a reminder? Is it going to be something that's going to take upkeep? When I was the U.S. Department of Education, they're not real big on memorials. And one of the stories they told when I was in D.C. for training was, back in the 1960s, this beloved teacher died, and so they planted a tree in his honor. And then, like 30 years later, the tree was struck by lightning, and they had to cut it down. And within a week, his widowed wife said, okay, when are you going to replace that tree? Because that was in his honor. And so they're not really big. Another thing is, what are you going to do when the date rolls around a year, in 2 years, of the event. Now, people always want to use the word anniversary, and I hate when we say this is the 50th anniversary of Columbine or whatever. Anniversaries are something we celebrate, and we never want to celebrate a tragedy. We want to remember that day. We want to remember the victims. We want to commemorate the tragedy and how we've risen above. But how do you do that without causing copycats, without reopening wounds, etc.? And as always, how do we deal with the media? So if you've worked with your staff, they might have something that looks like this. Okay, and what you see right here is what they have filled out, and you're guiding them through that. And there are things on here that you might not be doing, and I understand that, but you want to show your staff that the whole purpose of this exercise with your staff is to show them what you're doing, and then where do we have room for improvement? Okay, and this is really important because now you've said, hey, we believe we've been doing some great stuff here, but what we need to know is there anything else we should be doing? And this gives them the chance to actually recognize and acknowledge. And now this is a place for you to go forward. So that's a left to bang exercise. I think it took us about 30 minutes to get through with some people talking, etc. What are some of your questions or comments on that? Any thoughts that you had? Could you do, here's my question. Could you do this exercise with your staff? And would this be a useful thing to do with your staff in August of next year when hopefully schools are back to normal? So I'll give you a second here while I take a sip of my Monster energy drink to see what your thoughts are on that. I think it paints a great overall picture of what the school is doing because some teachers might not have ever known what's going on. Yeah, we do a horrible job, Stephanie, of really tooting our own horn. And part of the reason why that is because schools are safe and we are doing a good job. You know, the negative Nellies are always going to complain, but again, this is how we share with our staff, so that they can become advocates. And while I'm on that note, so I have been very lucky to work with great law enforcement and fire agencies in the communities that I work in. They are truly dedicated to helping the school keep their students and staff safe. And a second advantage to that is I've had multiple police chiefs and fire chiefs tell me that when something bad happens in another part of the country, they get calls from members of the community saying, could this happen in our school? Are our schools vulnerable? And those fire chiefs and police chiefs are the advocates that say, anything's possible, but let me tell you how our school district has worked with us to keep students and staff safe. So it goes back to just letting them know. So this is our agreed upon active shooter definition, and we've all seen that before. So this thing of an active shooter, an individual actively engaging or in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and populated area. In most cases, active shooters use firearms, and there is no pattern or method to their selection of victims. So I think that this is very important because I'm going to take it back to our earlier discussion about domestic violence. There are some people that think a shooter is a shooter is a shooter. And so if we viewed all shooters as active shooters, then does that mean there's only one method for stopping them? And the answer is no. So, for example, if we want to stop the domestic violence shooter, that's going to take a type of training. Let me ask this, and this will be a yes or no. Gangland shooting. Is that a active shooter event? Yes or no? No, very good, because it's not random. They are specifically going out there targeting somebody. What about this? I am a high school senior. It's lunchtime in the cafeteria. I go up to a girl I have a crush on. I ask her if she would go to the prom with me. And she said, not only would I not go to the prom with you, I never want you to even talk to me again. Now get out of my face. And she humiliates me in front of all of her friends and mine. So the next day I come to school and I shoot her. Is that an active shooter event? No, very good. See, that's again, it's a targeted act of violence. So yeah, see, I'm getting all these no's because so let me ask you this. Would a threat assessment team necessarily catch those two shootings? And the answer is no. So when you think about how do we stop shooting in our schools, let's think about all the kinds of shootings that might occur. Uh, let's see, it may come out to law enforcement that way when reported, but after the investigation, it doesn't fit the definition. That's a perfect example. So I live in Central Ohio. Many of you guys remember the Chardon shooting, where the kid brought the gun to school, shot a bunch of kids in the cafeteria, ran out of ammunition, took off running, and everyone said that that was an active shooter event, and it wasn't. It was a targeted act of violence. He was specifically shooting those kids. None of those students, by the way, even went to Chardon High School. They went to Chardon High School to catch a bus to go somewhere else, and it truly was a drug. It was all regarding drugs. So that's why they couldn't have prevented that, because it was not behavioral related. So I just want to remind you of that. Don't think there's a one size fits all to prevent shooting. So when we go back to our mental health, to our environment, to our training, there's more than one thing that we have to do if we are going to prevent these events. So we can use anything now. We're seeing in Europe, vehicles are being used. Fire as a weapon is something that we're working on some exercises in Columbus. When we look at all of these things, Columbine and Virginia Tech, the one thing I want you to remember about Columbine is that they planned that event for over a year, and their initial plan was to blow up the pillars in the cafeteria to bring the library down, and when kids ran out of the building, that's when they wanted to shoot. Virginia Tech was one of the deadliest shootings, and they used a pistol. Most people don't realize that the reason why the bad guy was wearing a fishing vest is because when he had studied active shooter events, he saw that a lot of times the shooter was stopped when they were reloading. So by wearing a fishing vest, he could keep spare magazines. The San Bernardino shooting that happened at the office complex, that was in plans for 6 years. So, things that we know, on average, it takes police 3 minutes to arrive. Time for the perpetrator before they're neutralized is 12 minutes. 49% are ended before the event, before the police even arrive. And 2 are killed and 4 were injured on average. So, those are stats. But what I really want you to understand is the value of time. Okay, when we're working in our schools, we have to tell them, folks, don't expect the police to be here right away. Even if there's law enforcement on scene, if you remember correctly, there was an SRO at Columbine that engaged with the shooters, and that did not stop the event. The Virginia Tech, I always feel badly for the Virginia Tech law enforcement agency, because they were criticized by their response. And yet, if you studied the Columbine or the Virginia Tech event, you'll know that before the bad guy went to the school or to the building to start shooting, he had gone to a dormitory, killed a girl and the RA who lived next door. And so what Virginia Tech did is they recalled third shift and brought them back to the scene. They notified the local law enforcement agency what was going on. They were there within 2 minutes and 5 minutes to get to the perpetrator, and you still see how many people were killed. So what that means is we have to, plans have to be developed and personnel empowered and trained to save lives. That is so important. In that preparedness activity has to go beyond the tactical response because there's more to it than that. So the true first responders, okay, are the people who are first on the scene is the staff that's on that scene. And I know that a lot of people, if you're a high school SRO, you're already on the scene. There was an article in this morning's paper. They still don't have a plan to put SROs back in the high schools in Columbus schools, which is kind of a moot point because the schools aren't in session. You have to have your EOPs. And the thing that I keep telling people is, under stress, you will lose your physical control. I don't know how many of you have taken CRAs. Our one district cut funding for SROs. That's horrible, absolutely horrible. And so, how many people here have taken CRAs, Citizen Response to Active Shooter Event? See if any of you have taken that. It's through Alert out of Texas. I have Chris. Okay, Officer Chris Chester. Great. I love that, where they teach you what happens to your motor skills when your heart rate goes up. Those of you who have not taken CRAs, Citizen Response to Active Shooter Event, it's out of Texas State University. I've taken the course, I think 3 times now. All 3 times it was free. Local entities will put this on. So then, as we look at the tactical response, have we taught people how to call 911? Is there been a neutralization of the perpetrator? Law enforcement is arriving, rapid deployment, establishment of incident command, which doesn't happen. Quick question for any of you who are law enforcement or fire: are you guys starting to use rescue task force to get medical personnel in? Great. Rescue task force, I worked with the school district in Pennsylvania where it was not a shooting but a stabbing. And one of the things that the teachers, that really caused trauma for the teachers is, before the use of rescue task force, if a medical personnel wouldn't come in until the scene was cold. Well, now we're starting to send in medics when it's warm. So that's important, but we're seeing a lot of interoperable radio communications. What do we call the warm zone? Sounds similar to the rescue task force. Yeah, so let's take, real quick, I'll do rescue task force as we look at what's happened at Parkland. But so let's say that the first 2 officers who arrive on scene move through the building, and they see wounded staff and students on the first floor, and they corner the bad guy up on the second floor. So the second floor where the bad guy is, that's the hot zone. And then the warm zone is the area where we're still not 100% safe. And so what happens is we train the next group of law enforcement officers to be security for the fire department, to bring medics in. And the job of those law enforcement officers is to solely protect the medics while they treat the students, to either drag them out or to have somebody else come in and drag them out. And when we look at what happened in Parkland, I was let's see, one lesson we learned was training is don't confuse clear to mean no threats. Fire means no victims. Yeah, Deputy Eli, that's a great point. He says one lesson we learned was to train so we don't use confusing terminology. Law enforcement may use clear to mean no threat. Fire department means no victims. And you will never know those kind of things unless you do exercises side by side where you find those problems. Our biggest problem is police, we are driven from the bottom up, so the first thing that police do when we arrive on the scene is we go in. First thing the fire department does is they set up a command post, because they wait for supervisors. And so there was some issues there. I was contacted by some people for testimony on this shooting. I really don't want to do it. I hope I'm not called again. because the school did some things that just weren't very smart. They actually saw the shooter. The people that understand this, Marjory Stoneman Douglas was a very wealthy school district. They actually had people who sat and monitored cameras, and not a lot of districts have that. And they saw the shooter get out of an SUV or out of an Uber with a black bag and said, "Hey, isn't that the guy who we said if there's ever going to be an active shooter, it's him?" And yet they didn't call. I think they called it a red door. They didn't, using code words. They didn't lock everything down, and so that really could have been prevented. When we look at what happens, he enters the building with a rifle. He begins shooting. 911 was called. You could hear shooting in the background. Now, still some discrepancy over the fire alarm, but that's going to play out a little bit later for us. It is now believed that the fire alarm was not pulled, but the smoke from his gun set off the fire alarm. And where this kind of made things confusing is they had a fire alarm earlier in the day. And so they thought, why are we having two fire alarms? So starts on the first floor, moves up to the second, then the third. 7 minutes. It stops after 7 minutes. And what's interesting is, again, if you study this, and if you're in this profession, you don't study what happened in an event because you have this morbid curiosity. You study what happened in these events so that you can get a lessons learned. Now, if you don't think that this was not a well planned out event, the shooter in this case was actually wearing a Marjory Stoneman Douglas shirt so that he could blend in with the other students. His plan was to move up to the third floor, go into the stairwell, and shoot at first responders from a window in the stairwell. What he did not know is those were hurricane windows, and so he couldn't shoot through the windows and accomplish it. So he literally dropped his gun and walked out with other people. Okay, so he flees as law enforcement's coming in, and nobody knows that he's there. Okay, so there was confusion about the fire drill. Teachers didn't know how to lock their rooms. We'll talk about this later. Your classroom door should always be locked, even if it's open. Some teachers refused to unlock their door, which was the exact same thing that happened at Sandy Hook. So we'll talk about that. Students were hiding under their desk or in a crouching position with the doors open. No, the doors should be, if you can't escape, your door should be closed and locked. Students were Snapchatting during the event and showed pictures of people being shot. Perpetrator attempted to barricade his class to shoot out and evacuating students. And when everything failed, he left. Now, let's just talk for a second about fire drills, because the day after Parkland, I am by no means an expert on anything. But usually after a shooting event or something horrific at school, I do get calls from newspapers, television, magazines, all that kind of stuff. They all want an opinion, and I'll give it to them. But I also get calls from clients who want to be assuaged because, hey, where are we? Because whenever something happens, I immediately start looking at plans and training I've developed. But the weird phone call that I got was I got 2 calls from superintendents who said, hey, we had fire drills scheduled for February 15th, and when we pulled the alarm, both teachers and students refused to leave the classroom. And so I immediately go to our fire department and I said, hey, something's going on here. I'm kind of nervous. We've got to come up with a solution so that we don't have this kind of problem of kids and teachers refusing to leave. And so what we did is we developed a protocol, and this kind of talks about it. Usually as a fire drill, what we try to do is get out of the building as quickly as possible. And instead, what we're doing is let's get out of the building as safely as possible. So I can tell you that when I was a classroom teacher, it irritated me when the fire alarm went off. I would have the students line up at the door. I'd grab my grade book, a pencil, and my sunglasses, and I'd tell the students, go outside, turn left, go down the steps, turn left, go out the door, stand by the hill, I'll take attendance. And so now what we do when there's a fire drill or the alarm goes off, just like we teach our kids at home. Fire alarm goes off, you hear the alarm, I'm going to go up, I'm going to touch my door. Is my door hot? Nope, my door's not hot. My door's closed, my door is locked, because that's what we teach them, is even if your door is open, it should be locked. If your door is closed, it should be locked. So then I'm going to open the door and I'm going to look out for a threat. I'm going to look for other teachers. I'm going to see if they see a threat. I'm going to listen. Do I hear gunfire? Okay. So now teachers should be the first one out the door, not the last, because if something is happening and I've got to get my kids back in the room, instead of me standing at the rear of the line saying, come back this way, I can turn, they can't move any farther. And I could say, go back. And then we make sure that the exterior door is always held open. So if students and staff have to get back in the building, and I can't think, was that Paducah, Arkansas, where the kids sat on the hill and one went in, pulled the fire alarm, and as they ran out, they shot at him, and then they couldn't get back in. So we put all these protocols in place. Why? Because we study events that have happened in the past. So law enforcement were on the scene within 3 minutes. This is kind of unique. 25% of the first responders had family members, spouses, and children at the school. Mass casualty EOCs were opened up, so they knew what was going on. Here's what's interesting. So every law enforcement officer except one law enforcement officer showed up off duty in shorts with a gun, and they told him not to go in. He went in anyways. But I don't know if any of you guys, when you do your active shooter training, especially when you're doing a rescue task force and you're involving actors to be the bad guy, we oftentimes have force on force officers shooting other officers, and these blue on blue. So try to imagine you are in one of the most stressful situations in your life, and you come around a corner and the only thing you see is a gun. And those of you that use airsoft or simunition, if you remember, when you do that, oftentimes when you shoot the bad guy, you shoot the bad guy in the hand, because that's where the gun is. You don't shoot them center mass, because we shoot at what we see. And so even with these officers in uniform, there were over 20 occasions where one officer almost shot another. So that's really important in training, that you go over that, so that people are prepared for that. This is one of my arguments where I say I'm not a big fan of arming educators. We put plans in place where there are firearms available to teachers in the school or employees in the school. But you know, those of you that work in schools, you see how some of the teachers dress. Would you know they were a teacher? It's not the days of, and I'm showing my age here, room 222, where all the female teachers wore dresses and all the men wore suit and ties. You know, you have some young teachers who look like kids. Is it possible that a law enforcement officer could and would shoot somebody? Those of you, again, that have the crazy instruction, and we tell people what to do when they're off duty and they have a firearm during an active shooter event at a mall. So I digress there for a second. I apologize. You know, when we take a look at the kinds of wounds that they had, you know, some of this is just boring stuff, but those of you who have taken tactical combat casualty, you know the importance of tourniquets, you know the importance of wound packing in the neck, in the armpits, and in the groin, and you know the tourniquets for the extremities. If they have a chest wound, about the only thing we could do is put on a chest seal, but people will die out in 15 minutes from bleeding. And almost every one of the victims had a minor gunshot wound, a major gunshot wound, and a chest wound. One of the things that was, you know, as you're reading some of the lessons learned, I don't know if any of you guys are on your active shooter team. I don't know what kind of rigs you have, but our teams, we all have a chest rig, and on our chest rig, we have a first aid kit. And to be honest, the first aid kit is for us, not for the victims. But in the case of they didn't establish a warm zone. The only medical personnel in there were the responding officers. I don't keep gloves in my kit because my kit's for me, so I don't need gloves. And so these officers, their hands are covered with blood. They couldn't even tear open the bags that had their first aid supplies in there. They had to use their teeth because their hands were so bloody. And again, I'm not faulting anyone. It would have been great if they could have established a warm zone so they could have gotten people in sooner. This is kind of the active threat pyramid. It begins first call for help, you know, stop the bleed, rapid deployment. First, it's a hot zone. From a hot zone, it goes from a warm zone. casual critical collection point, and then off to the hospitals. So if you study the Colorado, the Aurora theater shooting, you'll see that one of the problems that happened there was they couldn't get fire personnel to the back of the theater where the law enforcement officers were, and it ended up the law enforcement officers took the wounded to the hospital in their police vehicles. And where that kind of caused a problem for the hospital is they didn't know who was coming. You know, when an ambulance is transporting a person to the hospital, they call the hospital and let them know what they have so that the hospital can kind of set up a triage and a mass casualty event. Well, because it was law enforcement just taking people to the hospital, they didn't have that. So, you know, as we, and it looks like I have a slide out of place here, so I'm going to go to here. So let's take a look at some of the lessons learned from Sandy Hook. And I apologize, that's out of. But the first thing is all staff must be trained and empowered to act. They must be able to call a lockdown. They must be able to call 911, and they have to be able to make choices on how they're going to keep their staff and students safe. And you know, again, you're going to have my contact information. If you ever say, Gary, I need an exercise where I can test my staff members' ability to make decisions on their own, shoot me an email. I'll shoot you an exercise. It's really good because sometimes teachers say, I'm going to stay. Sometimes teachers say they're going to go, and they articulate why. I was doing a presentation, and it was I had the entire district there, the superintendent, police and fire were there, and I asked this one dumb question. I said, hey, how many people in here are allowed to call 911? And people were afraid to raise their hand, and the superintendent said, come on, that's just common sense. You're allowed to call 911. Well, in education, they tend to follow the rules, and so it's important that you articulate, you can do this, we want you to do this. So being able to get help as soon as possible, call 911 as soon as possible. But then the other thing is we got to train them what to report, your location, people injured, anything you can tell about the assailants. Do you believe there's bombs? You know, have you heard explosions? We were doing a security and vulnerability assessment for a school district, and what happened was most people have a system, and they can dial 911. And in this system, whenever you wanted an outside line, you had to hit 9 first. You picked up the phone, you got a dial tone, you hit 9, that gave you an outside line, and then 911. And what they were finding out is they were never able to call 911. And what we found out because of the security and vulnerability assessment is that in their system that nobody knew, you didn't have to dial 9 first. So this little sticker you see for emergencies, drop the 9, just dial 911. We made labels for every single phone in the district. We used library labels because then there's a clear tape that goes over that, so that any person who needed to call 911 knew they just had to pick up the phone and dial 911. Now, I don't know what it was like for you guys, but after Parkland, the state of Ohio made a lot of grants available for these buzzer systems, and I'm just showing you in this picture here that at Sandy Hook they had a buzzer system. Okay, it had to be buzzed in once the day started. And if you look here, this is where the bad guy shot in. I always believed that the bad guy shot through the window and walked in here, because if you would have shot out the doors, then he would have had to crawl under the crash bars. So he literally shot a hole and went inside. Okay, I think it's important that you understand that he shot his way into the building. Okay, but he only got into 2 classrooms. In the 2 classrooms that he got into, the doors weren't locked. In one case, the teacher couldn't have locked her door. And in the second case, it was a substitute teacher who wasn't given a key to lock the doors. And, you know, I keep referring to CRAZE and ALERT and Avoid, Deny, Defend. And the reason I'm really big on those programs is because they're all research-based. And one of the things that, you know, ALERT will tell you that you increase your chances of survival by 70% simply by being behind a locked door. So lockdowns have to be quick. Um, Remember, lockdown is not a plan. Lockdown is an option. It's a choice that you can make. And if you're on the third floor and shooting starts on the first floor, you are limited in your options. And so you may decide, well, we're just going to secure ourselves in place. And that's why I say, even if your classroom door is open because it's an old building and it's for air circulation, or now it's air circulation because of COVID-19, we lose our fine motor skills. Have that door locked, so you just have to pull it closed. Self-evacuation. What's amazing is if you decide that you're gonna evacuate, try to keep the kids spread out, because if they bunch up, I mean, think of a fatal funnel in a hallway. If you had 40 kids running down a normal hallway, those kids are all going to be bunched up. So if you can, small groups to do that. In the media report, there were 3 staff members who went out in the hallway and were quickly shot. And people, the news media, talked about them being a hero because they went out to try to stop the shooter. No, they said, boy, that sounds like a shooting. We better investigate. And guess what? That was a bad decision. Just as Scott said yesterday, if you hear gunfire, respond as if it's gunfire and react accordingly. It's better to overreact than underreact. And the thing that bothers me the most about Sandy Hook, and I was really glad that this came out in the report, is there's always this, we have to do something. Okay, do something. And the problem is the something that people come up with, a solution, has never been proven or effective, and it can actually be more dangerous. And so it's important to just kind of understand what's going on. And I got to start moving quick. So I'm going to teach you a system, levels of response, and I'm going to bust through this because I've been rambling too much, and we only have a half hour left. So generally, what we teach our schools are, here are your levels of response: stay put, no threat; shelter in place, something's happening outside; secured perimeter, something is outside, but it's a criminal event; and then lockdown. And we created this document that you, by the way, will have access to. It should already be, Joyce should have already uploaded this and made it available. And if we look at it, the event begins, stay put is the threat towards a student or staff. Here's what I'll go through these. Shelter in place. And so what it does is this is nice because it's a flow chart. Teachers have it at their desks, they hang it up on the wall. But, stay put, there's a medical emergency or maintenance issue. Medical emergency, it's an elementary school and a kid's fallen and broken his arm, and now they're going to wheel him out, and we don't want the people to see that. Or when maintenance issue, I always jokingly say that there was a protein spill somebody threw up in the hallway and the janitor hasn't cleaned it up yet, and so we don't want the kids in the hallway. Usually occurs right at class change. It's sometimes, like in high schools and middle schools, there might have been a fight in the cafeteria. And things haven't just calmed down. So there's no threat to the harm or staff. So we just tell them, folks, ignore the bell. Don't move until we tell you. All right. Could be a drunk parent in the office. Just because they're drunk doesn't mean they're a threat, but we just don't want the kids exposed to that. I taught in a building where it was not uncommon to have a drunk parent in the building at 9 o'clock in the morning. I put down parent communications, because whenever there's an issue at the school where something changes, you have to get a message out. Shelter in place, it's usually going to be weather or hazmat. We're going to have to do a reverse evacuation. If the kids are outside, they need to come inside. And if it's not weather related, we could possibly continue to keep teaching. Again, there's the parent communications. Secured perimeter means there's a threat outside the building. One of my clients in Pennsylvania, we were talking, and right at dismissal time, somebody had robbed a check cashing place. And it was like 5 minutes away from the school. So here it is, they want to dismiss, but they had to go in a secure perimeter. No one's allowed in or out of the building. All the exterior doors are locked. Outside windows, if possible, are covered. The nice thing about this is, in a secured perimeter, some schools will say, okay, there was a robbery in the neighborhood, we need to go in a lockdown. Well, in a lockdown, everything stops. Well, in a secured perimeter, we can continue teaching, just no one's allowed in or out of the building. We may ask teachers to that are on their planning time to kind of walk around and look for things that are going on to make sure all the doors are closed. But teaching can continue. Again, parent communication. So when we say that there is a lockdown, we mean that the worst possible thing has happened. The threat is directly inside the building, okay, or somebody's shooting at the building, because we've seen that as well. So if we're going into what we call a lockdown, it means that there is a direct threat inside the building. So, we call a secured perimeter a soft lockdown. Yeah, Joseph, I'll tell you, I jokingly say, with the word lockdown, it's kind of like the word pregnant. Are you a little bit pregnant or are you pregnant? So we try to keep the lockdown so that people know that this is the worst possible thing that could happen. So I hear exactly what you're saying. And again, I'm not the expert on anything. You have to do what works for your community and your school. So when we are in a lockdown, we do what's called the 3 outs: lockout, get out, take out. Okay, those are the 3. Aren't schools in a secured perimeter every day? The answer is kind of, sort of, in a way, but not really, because yeah, the outside of the building is secured, but students can leave. If you're in a secured perimeter because there's a criminal event, we notify parents, because if they're coming to get their kid, different if you have an SRO. If you're coming to get your kid for a dentist appointment, we're not opening the doors for anything. So yeah, schools are kind of in a secured perimeter, but students are allowed to leave if they need to. And I know that some schools have portables or outside classrooms, so there's movement there. So lockouts are the lockout, get out, take out. That's what happens during a lockdown. I use this here from the French class in Holden Hall, and look at these kids sitting here like this. And I always say this: no kids were killed in this picture. Okay. Let's see, we have buildings that have a fence that connects buildings and all the doors are locked. Good. We use the term external lockdown, inside lockdown, intruder response. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I remember when we first started doing this, we had codes. I remember the first time I was working patrol in the streets, and they said any car that can respond, there is a 10-100 at the bank. And I looked at the sergeant, and I said, "What's a 10-100?" And he said, I don't know. I think it's a bomb. And so the point being is, try not to have some jargon. Would we have students sitting on the floor like this? Absolutely not. So in a lockdown, okay, cover the windows if you can do so. Bad guy can't shoot, see what they can't shoot. Darken the room. Predetermine where your students would be so that they're out of the line of fire. This is the only thing that I can never get around, and I'm gonna turn on my camera just to. But I tell teachers to stand in the doorway of their classroom where the door is open, and I tell them to pretend that they have a gun. And I say to them, we could use our SWAT hands. I can say to them, okay, now I want you to look, what's the farthest you could shoot? If this is the farthest you could shoot, and there's plenty of space over in this part of the classroom, that's where your kid should be. Most classrooms are side loaded. So if I shot here, I'm going to shoot along a wall. So I don't want that. I want my kids where they, if the gunman shoots through the door, they're out of the line of fire. I'm going to turn that. Your appetite for lunch. I had a face that was made for radio. So students should be standing out of the line of fire, not sitting on the floor huddled together. And I know some schools are doing that. We don't want them sitting there. Okay. And Deputy Eli, if you email it to me, I'd appreciate that. So I want to talk about door vulnerabilities. This is Red Lake, Minnesota. This was one of the most horrific school shootings. Bad guy shot through this window, came inside and killed students. Did the bad guy get through the door? The answer is no. 1 year later in Minnesota, Hastings, Minnesota, kid shot through the glass here, reached in and opened the door. We all know about Red Lake, Minnesota. No one ever talks about Hastings Middle School. And the reason why you don't hear about Hastings Middle School is because the teacher in that classroom had a relationship with that student and said, "You don't want to do this." And the student handed them a gun. Remember what Ron said on the first day about a positive school climate. Remember what somebody said today about being out in the hallway to build relationships with students. Now, please never do this during a drill, okay? We never do this. But most classroom doors open out. They have an outward egress. It's fire code. So even if I piled all these chairs up here and the bad guy broke through the glass and opened the door, will these stop him? Well, it'll slow him down. Remember, bad guys study us, okay? And so they know now that police are coming right away. They know we're not going to do tactical loitering like we did in Columbine. And so they're going to pick the easiest targets. Remember, the only two rooms the Sandy Hook shooter got into were the two rooms where the door was unlocked, okay? And then he panicked because he dropped his gun, committed suicide, etc. So anything we can to secure our doors. If you're building brand new classrooms, darkening the windows doesn't help anymore because they're all LEED certified and you don't need windows anyways. But in older buildings, the reason why we covered the windows and darkened the room is if the bad guy was going from the hallway where it was bright to the classroom where it was dark, they wouldn't have their night vision. And if you were going to attack, okay. What we're trying to do is delay. We talk about, inexpensive things like using dog leashes. And the reason why we like dog leashes because it has a loop on one side and a hook on the other. And even just kind of looping it around something is going to slow down the bad guy. Here we secured the loop to the doorknob and then wrapped the dog leash and secured it. Notice right up here where it's secured. So now if the bad guy broke through this glass and turned the knob, they're still not going to be able to open the door. Delay, deter, deny. Here's with a different type of chairs. Here's now, of course, this window has to be covered, but I can guarantee you this is Detective Phil Greenbaum. He and I worked second shift for years. And notice what he did is he looped it around and he's holding it. So even if this door was unlocked, there's no way you can open that door. Okay, again, cover the windows. We have night locks in all of our classrooms. I like the night locks. I know those guys. The only problem I have with night locks is in any barricade device, almost all of them violate fire code and they slow down officers from responding agencies that are not from your agencies to get inside. But that's a local decision. Here we're using a chair as a lever. And there's no way you can open this door. Now, again, this window would be covered, but we had a preschool where you could fit all the kids in the bathrooms, but you couldn't lock the door. And I showed using a chair, I couldn't get in there because you're just using a lever to prevent it from happening. So if you're in an unsafe area, get out by whatever means is necessary. Break windows, but if you're going to teach them to break windows, teach them how to break windows. Break windows at the corner, not at the middle. Make sure you know which way the glass falls, okay? And then we tell people to take them out. You have a legal right to defend yourself, okay? And so we want to make sure that our teachers know that. And we tell them anything that you can use in here is a weapon, your Chromebook, your fire extinguisher, etc. I don't know if I can see. There's another picture. This slide actually came from a training I was doing with the police officers, and rectangle attached to the door so the teachers can move it. Yeah, that's very good. Some use magnets. You're not allowed to use magnets on a sprinkled building, but sometimes I just ask for forgiveness, not permission. But remember, if teachers decide that they're going to attack. Stay alive, don't hold back. If shooting is justified, deadly force is justified. And people always ask me, Gary, why is he going to hit this guy in the head with the fire extinguisher instead of spraying him? Because won't spraying him disorient him? This guy's trying to kill people. This is from Run, Hide, Fight. Okay? Since this guy's trying to kill people, that's what this guy's doing. He's going to hit him in the head, okay, as hard as he can, and then continue to hit him. Okay, so if the guy's laying on the ground bleeding out, okay, now spray him with the fire extinguisher. Make sure he's dead first. Make sure that you're in a position to attack. This guy really can't do a lot, but this guy can. All right. Now, the thing that I wish that you could see is, because this is, anyways, this is not a linear. It's not lockout, get out, take out. Imagine yourself in the middle, okay? These are your choices. Who makes that choice? Staff makes that choice, okay? Based on what you've trained them and what they see. Because of both Parkland and uh, Sandy Hook, ignore the announcements, ignore the fire alarm. Have your phone on silent but with you, because if your district has a mass notification system, we're going to let you know that the shooting has been stopped. Okay, the shooter is down. So now what you can do is you can remove your barricades but don't unlock. Now, do you guys remember how I said we're all the agencies that I'm working with are all doing rescue task force, and so when you get the message that the shooter is down, unbarricade but don't unlock, slide a red card if you have injured students, slide a green card if they're not injured. Now I know 15 years ago we were saying as soon as there's a shooter, slide a red card or green card. No. This is used for rescue task force, and the reason for that is if I'm the rescue task force and I've got 2 officers and 4 medics behind me, I'm going to go to the red doors first. Okay, I'm not going to go to the green one. I want to get to the red doors first. Officers will enter using a key. We train our people, and I'm telling you, I'm loud when I train them. I'm telling them, show me your hands, show me your hands, and their guns are going to be pointed. All these things are going to be going on. We prepare them for what's going to happen, so they know. It looks like the second I just must have repeated it. You know what? I keep hitting the same slides. So. I'm stopping with 13 minutes left. This is what we've talked about. So I'm going to go back to what Stephanie said. We keep our doors locked all the time, and we have a rectangular magnet tape over the door latch hole in the metal door frame so that teachers can move quickly. We found teachers took too long to try and lock their key door. We have noticed it helps. Just wanted to see your thoughts. Okay, Stephanie, this is where you have to work with your first responders, because what you're describing in a brand new building that has a sprinkler system is against fire code. Okay. But I have worked with so many fire departments and they've said, you know what? Schools don't burn. So I'd rather have that there. So I think that's a great idea, because what you do is you contact your local police department, who gets free from the state these magnetic bumper stickers that say click it or ticket, or save a life, look twice for motorcycles, etc. And so they'll give you these magnets and you just cut them to fit. So that's a great idea, especially because you can do that for little or no cost. All right. All right, so we have 12 minutes left. Again, here is my contact information. If you have anything to share with me, or if you want anything from me, please shoot me an email. Don't call me for the next 2 days because we're doing this conference thing, but I promise you I'll answer emails. So I went over a lot of stuff. I think I went over it kind of quick there towards the end. What kind of questions do you have? What do you want to share or talk about? Or you're just thinking, I want to go to lunch, Gary, shut up and let me go. All right, then. I have no other questions. I have nothing else. Wait, hold again. Do you have any videos or recommend training for breaking windows? No, but here's what we did. We had some buildings that were being torn down and windows that were being replaced. And so what we did is we actually, because the best training that you're ever going to have, okay, is training that involves all your first responders. So this is pre-COVID stuff, okay? So we developed a train the trainer course for one school district where we had police and fire were there. And fire taught a couple of things. Fire taught to stop the bleed, but then what they also did, this was the district that had the buckets with the hammers and the gloves and the goggles. They built frames, wooden frames, to be outside and they showed teachers how to break the windows, and then they let teachers do it as well. And so, so that's why working with first responders. But I'm sure if you got some videos, like I said, just always remember break the corner. Let's see, Ohio lists 3 levels of lockdowns in their generic EOP. Any reason that instead of your product or someone else, standard response protocols? I don't know. I'd have to look at the standard response protocols. I'm thinking it's from the I Love You guys, but I know that all my Ohio clients that I've helped them with their EOP, all the EOP asks is, what is your plan? And they just use the 3 outs and that I taught them. So they kind of get away with that. I don't know. I've never, I've got a phone call actually with Ohio Safer Schools next week regarding EOPs because most schools in Ohio will be on the 3-year cycle. So my first, I really like the I Love You Guys Foundation. I have used a lot of their stuff for reunification because they have some great stuff for reunification. But I just remember the first time for reunification, they said you will use the building where the event occurred, and you can't do that because it's an active crime scene. So, and I don't know if any of you guys have had the pleasure of hearing Michelle Gay talk. Her daughter was one of the children killed at Sandy Hook. She was actually part of their reunification plans before the event ever happened. I was speaking, I think, in Illinois, and she happened to be there and came up and talked to me right afterwards. And she said, "Man, I'm so glad you taught this because we did so many things wrong." So, but usually I Love You Guys Foundation. There's so much free stuff out there. So, and you know, our goal is for next year, because we really don't think at the the school safety conference that we don't think that we're going to be able to do a face-to-face conference next year. We'd really love to do a face-to-face conference, and one of the things that we may just do next year, because I know for some of you to show up 4 days in a row just to get this information, I mean, it's probably good that you're on a hybrid system or you're doing remote learning, but we're going to do some webinars that are just 1.5 hours, and it'll be on a specific topic like reunification or something like that. So, any others? Again, all the handouts that you received today, this presentation, the levels of response flow chart, you have access to all that. You will be getting, I know each day you get a link to get all the handouts, but we'll send you one link so that they're all together. So webinars will be extremely helpful. Yeah, that truly are helpful. And I always I'm on the editorial staff of. I hope every one of you gets Campus Safety Magazine. Do every one of you get Campus Safety Magazine? It is free, and it has a lot of great information, and they do a lot of webinars. And I'm actually doing a webinar for them next month on security and vulnerability assessments. So, all right. Well, you have my email, you have my information, so you know how to get more stuff from me. We will be back at 1:30 to talk about option-based response to active assailants in schools. What does research say? So everyone enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you after lunch.